Okay, let's get started, everyone. Welcome to Guests and Gusto. My name is Lee Seaman. I'm the Senior Executive Director of SCAD Film. And today I'm excited to welcome you to another writing workshop with author, showrunner, and television executive Deb Spera. Guests and Gusto is SCAD's virtual series of conversations and digital content with creators and innovators in our entertainment business and all of the disciplines taught at SCAD. You can learn more about our Guest and Gusto programming at scad.edu. If you're a SCAD student, you're getting emails about it, and you can find it on Blackboard as well. Today, we're happy to be joined by television producer Deb Spera. She owns her own production company called 1-2 Punch Productions, and currently is working on projects for Netflix. She was previously president of the Mark Gordon Television Company, whose many credits include a little show called Grey's Anatomy. During her tenure there, she found, developed, and executive produced Criminal Minds, Army Wives, Reaper, and Suspect Behavior. Prior to that, she was vice president of original programming at Showtime Networks, where she made over 40 television movies and miniseries, including the Peabody Award-winning Baby Dance and the Emmy-winning remake of 12 Angry Men. Deb has overseen, developed, and produced over 1,000 hours of television. That makes me very tired. And her other credits include Finding Carter and Fathers and Son. Most recently, Deb has been enjoying the success of her debut novel, Call Your Daughter Home, produced by HarperCollins Park Row. And she sold it to Netflix and is in the process of creating a limited series with them. And that's what we're here to talk about today. And she will be talking about this with our exceptional chair of dramatic writing, Avery Stork, who will be leading the conversation. So before I turn it over to Avery, we do have a poll question. And if you answer it, your name will be entered in to win a prize from SCAD. So here we go. With so many options available to watch television these days, what's your favorite way? Do you love appointment viewing, waiting for the series to drop or air each week? Do you like short binges, 2 or 3 episodes at a time on demand or on your DVR? Or are you going to wait for the full season and watch the whole story in one big long binge? Answer, and we will check the answers at the end. Questions for Deb can be put into the chat window, and we will have questions at the end. And if you have to leave or need to check out early, a recording of this will be available on Blackboard. And so, without further ado, please, Avery, take it away.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you so much. And thank you, Deb, for joining us today. When you joined us in the spring, it was such an amazing Q&A, such a great panel, and we had so much interest. And we had so much television talk and development talk that we didn't even get to talk about your novel and about the process now of you're writing it, but also of developing it for a different medium. So we are so excited that you're back. In the audience today, we have a mix of students. We have some dramatic writing students. I know my dramatic writing 101 and 106 class has joined us. They are Introduction to Screenwriting. So they are really just sponges ready to absorb. We also have writing students who do write short stories and fiction and novels, and plus some other students from film and television. So I'm just going to jump off and just say, please tell us about Call Your Daughter Home. Tell us about the novel, your inspiration for it, and then take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for having me again. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm coming to you from my camper truck because my husband and I decided we were going to drive across country in the midst of all this madness to see our families in New York and South Carolina and Kentucky. So I'm on leg 1 in New York, and I'm leaving soon to go to South Carolina. But you can see my little tiny space, my little tiny camper truck. So it's a pleasure to be here. All right. So Call Your Daughter Home. I mean, I can talk on a 2-pronged way. I can talk about my novel and adapting it for Netflix, and I can also talk from a producerial perspective about what to look for when you're looking for material that are novels and how to help a writer adapt a novel. I will say that, my many years as a producer helpful and beneficial to me as a writer, but I've relied very heavily on executives to help me with the development process, and it's been such an incredible experience. So I wrote my novel 4 years ago because I had a lull in my production schedule. There was nothing happening. A lot of projects that looked like they were going to go suddenly fell through. Happens a lot. And I was sort of sitting on my hands thinking I needed something creative to do. So I always had in my mind that I wanted to write a story about what we pass down from one generation to the next, both spoken and unspoken. And how does a family overcome abject poverty and dependency in a patriarchal society to autonomy and prosperity? And in my mind's eye, that took place or takes place over 5 generations. So I sat down and I sort of mapped out what I wanted to do, which was I wanted to write a tiny little novella. You know, I'm a producer, so I never really considered myself a writer. And so but I really wanted to tell this story because of where I'll talk about where I came from in just a minute. But I took some classes online at UCLA Extension, and I really studied the craft. And I wrote these 5 short stories spanning 5 generations of women set against the backdrop of different times. 5 generations of women from the same Southern family. So the first story took place in 1924. It was called Alligator. The second one took place post-World War II, Teeth in a Jar. The third took place in the 70s. The fourth took place in the 90s, and then the last took place in current day. And I grew up in Kentucky. My mother was very young when she had me. She was 16. My dad was 19. They ran off to Tennessee to get married because nobody would marry them in Kentucky. So it was a real shock to the rest of the family when they came back married. And because they had they were just too young to be having kids, frankly. And so my grandmother had a big hand in raising me. And I call her Mama. I dedicated the book to Mama. And she grew up in Branchville, South Carolina. And she had 6 kids. My mom was the oldest of 6. So when I was born, it was almost like having all these brothers and sisters. She would bathe me at night because she had this, or until I was almost like 12, almost, because she had this morbid fear of worms, and she thought they were caused by unsanitary conditions. So she would bathe me in this one bathroom. There was one bathroom in the whole house for everybody, tiny. And she would sit on this little white wooden child's chair with her knees butted up against the commode. She'd have a cigarette hanging out of the corner of her mouth, and she'd be bathing me, scrubbing all the dead skin off my body, between my toes, everywhere. That woman could bathe a girl. And she would tell me, that's when she started talking. She talked a lot about what she called desperate times, and about how she, picked cotton and scrubbed porches for a nickel, how she was hungry, how she lost her teeth when she was a teenager due to malnutrition. Her father died when she was young, and her mother had to farm the kids out to various relatives just so they could have something to eat. She grew up in Branchville, South Carolina, where this novel takes place. This is my book, Call Your Daughter Home. And Branchville, South Carolina is a tiny little town located between Charleston and Columbia, South Carolina. And it's very rural and very small. It has a railroad junction. It's the oldest railroad junction in the country. And at one time, this little town used to be very prosperous. Its primary cotton crop was cotton. And what a lot of people don't know is that in about 1916 to 1925, the boll weevils migrated from Texas into the South, and they destroyed the cotton crop. They destroyed it to such a degree that it plunged the South into a Great Depression long before the depression of Wall Street hit the rest of the country. So it was really like by the time Wall Street happened, it was a 1-2 punch for the South. And my family was no exception to those hardships. So I wrote these 5 stories, and one of the teachers said you have to send them out. So I started sending them out, and I started getting response from literary journals, but I didn't know anything about that business. So I reached out to a friend of mine who I was working with his name's Mark Bowden. He wrote Black Hawk Down. He wrote many books. And Mark and I were working on a project at AMC for his, based on his life as a cub reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer in the 70s. And I asked him what I should do about these literary journals, and he told me he didn't know anything about literary fiction. So he said I should call his publisher and friend, Morgan Entrekin, who owns all of Groves Atlantic, and he said, ask him. And I refused because I said, I'm not going to trouble him with some questions about little short stories. And he said, you have to call him because I told him all about you and he's expecting your call. So I'm a producer, so you do what you're supposed to do. Picked up the phone, I called Morgan, and he said, it sounds to me like you need an agent. And I said, no, I don't need an agent. I'm not a career writer. I'm a producer. I've done this. I'm getting interest. I just need to understand sort of what to ask for. I need to understand contracts, frankly. And he said, well, nobody's going to publish a novella because they don't sell. And I said, that's okay. I'm fine with that. And he said, you know what? Send me your work and let me look at it. So he read it and said, I needed an agent. And he sent me 4 agents. And he said, tell them I sent you. Send the work to them. Tell them I sent you. So I did. And a young agent who was born and raised in South Carolina, where this novel takes place, emailed me and said, I'm halfway through these stories. Don't do anything until you talk to me. I'll give you a jingle tomorrow. So she gave me a jingle. That's so Southern. I knew she was Southern as soon as I saw that. I'll give you a jingle. So I picked up the phone and she said to me, I don't believe these are short stories. I believe these are novels in disguise, and I think you should start with the first short story and expand it into a novel, and I want to represent you. Well, I was so taken aback and so surprised and so terrified that I literally laid on the couch for 2 weeks and cried like somebody shot my mother, because that was not in the plan. Like I had no plans of writing a full-length novel, and I was so stunned and surprised by her take on these stories that I just didn't know what to do. But I looked at who the writers she represented, and I was even more afraid, because I thought, oh my God, she represents some of my favorite writers. And I thought, there's no way, once she realizes I don't know what I'm doing, she's going to get buyer's remorse, and that's going to be that. So what I did was I pulled myself up off the couch and I gave myself permission to fail. And I told myself, I'm going to write badly every day for 1 hour, just as badly as I can. And in that permission and in that writing badly for 1 hour every day, I started to discover things, and the voices of the characters started to speak to me. And in 5.5 months, I had a first draft of a novel, and she gave me these incredible notes. And then 4 months later, I had a rewrite of that novel. And before the year was out, I had a full-length novel, and she sold in an auction with 5 major publishing houses bidding on it, and I chose Park Row. It was a real, probably one of the most exciting things that's ever happened to me in my career. And I've done a lot of producing, but this was mine. I feel like I've been a midwife to other writers for 30 years. And, you help other writers create and shape their vision to bring to the screen. But this was something that was solely my vision. And I had a teacher tell me that, there's an enormous amount of validation in creating your first work, because it's such a private thing. It's such a personal thing. And he's right. It has been an incredible journey. So last year, I was in Shanghai, China, teaching class for a week. And I got a call from the head of Netflix, and she said, the woman who runs drama at Netflix, and she said, I want to option your novel. I've known Channing for many years. We did Criminal Minds together, and we've just come up through the business together. And I said, well, that sounds great, but I want to write it. And she said, yes, I'm in. At which point I started getting really anxious again, because I've never written for television. I've only helped other writers, but I was up for the challenge, and I never ever viewed this as a movie. A lot of people said, well, it's a movie. I have a very certain specific parameters that I look at material with to determine whether or not it's a movie or a limited series or a full-length series. And for me, this was a limited series because it's told from the perspective of 3 different women. The novel is set in 1924, rural South Carolina, and it tells the story of Gertrude, who's 28 and has to make an unconscionable decision to let her children starve to death or die at the hands of an abusive husband. And she does make an unconscionable decision, which sets the motion into action, sets the story into motion. And she comes in contact with Retta Boodles. Retta is a 60-year-old Black woman born the day of emancipation. She works for the same family that owned her family. She's based on a woman who was a very close friend who lives in Branchville still. Retta and her husband, Odell, who are very much in love, are the matriarch and patriarch of a small Black community in Branchville called Shake Rag. That community still exists. And then Annie Coles is the matriarch of the plantation that once owned Retta's family. And she is a transplant into Branchville. She married into money, but she came from quite a bit of money herself. And when one of her children died at a young age, she threw herself into her own business to sort of combat her grief. So she owns something called the Sewing Circle, which employs several women in the region sewing feed and seed bags with the vision of starting a menswear line and a women's wear line to expand their business and help women, poor women from the region. So these 3 disparate women come together and fight a greater evil. And that's the story in a nutshell of my book. And so writing it for the screen, the first thing Netflix asked me for was a Bible. And if you don't know what a Bible is, essentially what a Bible does is tell the buyer or the reader what the show is and how many episodes are the show, what the tone is, what is your vision for this show? Tone, music, characters that inhabit the show. How do you imagine it visually? How are the episodes broken down? And I think asking for the Bible first was incredibly insightful, a very good thing to do because it helped me so much break everything down before I began. Netflix always orders 2 episodes and a Bible, so I was tasked to write 2 episodes, starting with the outline. And sorry, turn my phone off. And so I did the Bible, which was like 26, 27 pages long, and then they sent me off to outline for episode 1. Now, what I discovered was when you're writing for the screen, you want to really pay attention to the cinematic component of your story. I did that automatically in writing the book, probably because I'm always conscious of the cinematic. I want to hear it, I want to smell it, I want to see it, I want to taste it, I want to have a sense of place and a sense of tone, and as you guys know, because you go to school in Savannah, the summer in the South is no joke, and that kind of heaviness and wetness and sounds of the bugs and all of that is very specific to the place. And frankly, August in the South can be dangerous. I wanted to capture all that. So in writing the outline, what I found was in my first pass was I was really trying to tell the story visually. How can I tell the story visually? Because your camera always reveals subtext. I'm a big proponent of directors that pay attention to how a camera reveals subtext. And also, as a television writer, and for those of you who are considering television versus film, in film, writers don't have as much control or power. It is a director's medium, and the director is sort of the boss, if you will, of that type of work. Whereas in television, the writer is king, and the writer is tasked with the responsibility of illustrating and telling the director and the actors and the viewer what it is that he or she is saying. What is the message, if you will, that they want to get across? And because, by the way, the book is the first short story in my series of stories. It used to be called Alligator, because I wanted to set the stage for abject poverty and dependency in a patriarchal society and how to navigate that. You know, the setting had to be very, very clear, and the dire circumstances had to be clear. So in the first pass of the outline, I really wrote it for the Gertrude brings us through the story. She is the fire that lights the fuse, that sends us off on the journey, and understanding how and why she does what she does by the end of the first episode, because it's a brutal act that she has to do, and it's a terrible, terrible decision that she has to make. And so how do you earn that? How do you earn that decision? And I had to veer away from the book and create some new things in order to do that. And that was really enlightening too, because, you know, it's easy to be precious about your work. It's easy to be precious about the material, but I think it's really important to consider how you open up a story, and some of the ways that you earn the deeds that your characters have to do. So that was really interesting, and their notes, I have to say, were extraordinary. I've worked with a lot of writers, well, not a lot, but several writers who resent executives' notes. I used to be an executive, and I think the value that they bring to the table, especially really experienced executives, is that they've worked on so much material. They know the pitfalls, they know the successes. I got lucky because the executives I'm working with, 3 really incredible women at Netflix, and they all are so well read, and they've been at this for a very long time, that their guidance was incredible. So I found things in the writing of this show that I wish I would have found when I was writing my novel, frankly. Brand new things that I was like, oh, wow, how could I have missed that in the writing of the novel? But when you're creating a world that you have to tell visually, and it has to be populated, and you have to be very clear about the journey that you're setting these characters on, suddenly you find things that you otherwise might not have found. So I was heartened by their response to the outline, but even more heartened by their response to the first draft. Their notes were incredible. And because I've sat with this novel for so long, when they had questions about certain things or characters or actions, I found myself already knowing the answer to some, and it was fun to create and to illustrate in a clear way what that path looked like. And if I didn't illustrate it on the page, then I found myself, like, my brain started to find things that otherwise I might not have found, just by them asking the right question. So I've written the first draft, the first episode, and finished with that. I've done a couple of notes passes. I turned in episode 2, which is, in my view as a producer, episode 2 is probably the hardest episode in television, because you're asked to duplicate but advance story. Duplicated in the sense of the tone and the pace and the suspense and the tension, and then advance the story. You know, who leads us? What are the repercussions of the action of that first episode? You know, I've done many shows as a producer at many different networks, and they all have sort of a different, well, they all have a different brand, but they also have different act structures. Netflix doesn't have an act structure, but I knew that in order to pull an audience into the next episode, I would have to leave that episode with a bang, and I do, literally, to take us into the second episode. Oh, I just lost my train of thought. I had something else I wanted to say, and it's gone. I'll find it. My brain will find it. But I think that this experience has definitely left me wanting more. I want to write more, and after I wrote these first 2 episodes, they asked me to revise the Bible, and that's even better because you write the Bible first. It's a great way to break down your book. If you have a book as a producer, or if you have a book as a writer, and you write out the Bible. I wish I had mine in front of me, but here's the way I structured mine. Why am I the person to tell this story? I started with that. This story is very personal to me. I shared with you some history about my family, and this was what motivated me to write this book, and it's what motivates me to tell this story. So why am I the person to write this? What is my personal connection to this material? Then I talk about the log line. This story is about 3 disparate women who have to come together to fight a greater evil. It's a little longer than that, but that's it in me paraphrasing that. And then I break down the characters. Gertrude and her family. Who are the people that inhabit my story? Gertrude and her family. Here is a description about these people. And I'm very detailed. Oftentimes you have to go back and cut, but I'm detailed in who they are, not how they look. I find a lot of writers fall into the pitfall or the trap of describing a character's looks, and it's not about that. It's about who they are. Gertrude has 4 daughters. Who are they? How do you describe who they are? And then, so Gertrude's world, Gertrude's family, and the people that she comes in contact in that world. That's 4 daughters, her brother Burns, his wife Marie, her father-in-law Otto, her abusive husband Alvin. And then I did Retta Boodles and her family and community, the community of Shakereg, who inhabits that. And then Annie Coles and her family. And then I did a little section about who populates the town. Characters that are going to be important in series that aren't in necessarily every episode. We call them recurring characters. They're not series regulars, so I included them. And then I started to break down the episodes 1 through 8. Because I've already written episodes 1 and 2. I've just broken down episodes 3 through 8. And because I've written the first 2 episodes, how I broke down episodes 3 through 8 is different than how I originally wrote the Bible, because suddenly you see how much content it takes to create a full episode, and you're looking at how to tell the story in a new way. What I do is I name every episode thematically. So I think it's important because I don't ever want to lose track of what I'm trying to say in the episode. Yes, you have all these storylines, but what is it you're trying to say as a writer? What is it that you want to convey? What are the themes that you want to explore? And obviously for me, it's these women from completely different classes and races who have to navigate a purely patriarchal system. And how do they do that? And how do they survive in a very dire time? With grief and with hunger, and also how do I not make it all so dire that you just don't want to watch it anymore? Because life isn't like that. Life is, even in the worst of circumstances, humor can come, and beauty, real beauty can come. Yeah, Avery.
I have a question. Are you going beyond the book when you were kind of breaking down your 8 episodes? Did you realize that you had so much content to fill the first few episodes? Are you sort of going beyond the last page of your book in terms of story?
No, the book itself is self-contained for this particular limited series. I have another idea that ideally I'd like to do these 5 generations, 5 books, 5 limited series, kind of like a Roots for women. How have women navigated society from getting the vote to current day? How has it changed? How is it the same? What are the anxieties that we, not anxieties, but what are the unspoken things that we pass down, and anxieties are one of them, in order to navigate this society? And what are the expectations of women, as mothers, as wives, as women in a community? How do we navigate our role, and how are our roles and our identity the same and separate?
One thing that I love that you're talking so much about what the story is about, the themes, not so much plot. This happens and then this happens, this happens, because I think that that's such an important thing for writers. When we're developing, it's not just these are the plot points. It's why, like you said, why are you the person to tell the story, and why is it meaningful to you?
I'm glad you brought that up, because when I'm developing, plot is the last thing I'm worried about. Characters are the first thing I'm worried about. Your characters drive the action. If you have plot and you don't have characters, you have nothing. It is an empty suit. And so your characters have to be well defined. And I also want to convey how important your detail work is. I find a lot of beginning writers particularly write in generalizations. And because you write in generalizations, it doesn't mean anything to the individual reading it or watching it. You want to be specific as you can be, because some of these things that happen in your life, you think, oh, nobody's going to be interested in that. But because they're so detailed, they bring things to life in a way that no other story can. Your specific details are critical to bringing a character to life, the breadth of a character.
I love what you said about character descriptions are not just character introductions, and characters are not just what they're wearing or what they look like. In fact, we should put that in. It's who they are. And my 101 and 106 students are laughing right now because we just went over that. And I'm like, I don't care that they have a green shirt on, unless it's absolutely necessary to something that's about to, that you need to set that up. So
yeah, if you have a character who's obsessed with green, I have a character. I have a character in one of my stories that he's a doctor and his whole office is green. His walls are green, his furniture's green. If those kinds of details are important to that character, then sure. But otherwise, I don't care if she has blonde hair or brown hair, clearly all the women, Gertrude and her daughters, are going to be super thin because they haven't eaten. But I don't talk about them being thin. I talk about them being hungry and starving, and they haven't had food for 3 days. And Mary, the littlest, is eaten up with worms. And Edna, her oldest, she never stops talking. Gertrude says she's going to come to the devil's own end. She'll talk to anybody. Lily thinks she's tough, but she's not. She'll hit you in the back all the way home and then beg to be let in the back door for fear of the night. These characters have to be specific with regard to who they are internally. And once you know that, then you'll find a plot that starts to evolve that is helpful to you. The fact that Gertrude is starving, that her daughters are starving, that she wakes up in Polk Swamp, a swamp, with her husband, with an eye swollen from the beating she got from her husband the night before. Her children haven't eaten for 3 days. Her husband is requiring her to bring one of her daughters home to go work for his father, who's just as bad as he is. Sets Gertrude in action. What's she gonna do? Is she gonna die at the hands of this man? Or is she gonna allow her children to die? What's she gonna do? And that, because I know who she is and what her circumstances are and what she wants and needs, then I can set her into motion. Then that's how you derive plot. So, and also scene work. It's important to think about scene work when you're adapting a novel, because your scenes aren't, they shouldn't be just images and just two characters talking at each other. There should be something someone wants, something someone needs, an obstacle to overcome, and then what are the repercussions of overcoming that obstacle? So how does one thing lead to another, lead to another. What you're doing, especially in episode 1, is you're planting the seeds for the entire series. In my mind, the best show on television that's ever done this is Breaking Bad. If you've ever seen the pilot of Breaking Bad, you will see that every single seed for the entire length of that show is planted in the first episode. It's brilliant. And what you want to do in your first episode is plant those seeds. And because I have 3 women, I also had to think about point of view. My book is told from 3 different points of view, but Gertrude is the defining force in the book. So I had to lead the audience member into the book through Gertrude, and then shift, pass the baton, if you will, to these other 2 women. But Gertrude's still my main force through, and I found a really cool way to do that visually, and I'm really happy with it, as are they. But your point of view is critical in a book. You can't just start with a singular point of view and then bam, pop over to another point of view. You have to really design how you're going to tell that story. One of my favorite movies is a movie called Moonlight. If you've never seen it, watch it. It is incredible. It's an incredible study in structure and point of view, because it takes a man's life and tells a point of view from his child to his young adult to his an adult stage, and it's incredible. It's not a multi point of view, but it's just really good. What else can I tell you?
I know students definitely were going to want to ask questions, but I just wanted to back up, and I have a question for you. If you could, since you're developing this for Netflix, and since now in streaming, there's not those typical commercial act outs. I know that our students and our professors teach drama pilot, our students tend to write in terms of act outs, just because there's the short sequences. Did you do that in your outline? Did you approach it that way? Or is there a new way that in the streaming world that you're approaching your outline? And if you could talk about what the outline looked like, because we go from Bible to episode, and there's just not a lot of time spent on outline. And I think our students would like to hear sort of what your outline looked like.
Yeah, my outline was no more than 12 pages, and I did not use an act structure, although I think I did it innately, because I passed the baton. So in some ways, each act is act 1 is Gertrude, and then we switch to Retta, and then we switch to Annie, and then we come back to Gertrude. And then by then, once I've introduced all 3 characters and put them into motion, then I'm really tracking Gertrude's actions and coming back to them. It's almost like a piece of music. Gertrude is the melody line, and they are the harmony lines. But I didn't break it into a specific act structure. I've worked so much in that that I think it's almost innate in me to leave the audience with a bit of a cliffhanger. And also, how do you write your transitions? Your transitions are really critical. Like, if you are going to another character, how do you transition to that other character? And it needs to be handled in I think, a cinematic way. I want to see something within the content that is both visual and emotional, so that when I'm passing the baton to that other character, it feels like, oh, okay, yes, I'm going into this now. I'm not being very articulate, but I hope that helps.
That's really, it's not just like this scene ends, now this scene starts. There's a feeling of the emotional continuity or through line that you're building towards something. I love that you're calling them.
People leave transitions out of the work far too often. Pay attention to your transitions.
I think Heather Hale has a question. Hi, Heather. Heather has a question.
Great.
Well, she kind of just answered it, but I was wondering, how do you switch point of views? You kind of sort of just answered it, though.
Yeah. Sorry, my husband's coming in. What? Okay. My husband's telling me he's putting the burgers on. Sorry. Anyway, yes, there is a scene in the second episode where Gertrude finds a package that's for Retta. And rather than having her open the package, open the letter, we have the package that's Retta's, and then I'm with Retta. I'm able to go to Retta, because it's almost like you're leaving clues. here's a clue. We're not going to finish this action. We're going to go to this character and we're going to come back to this action.
So do you have all 3 POVs in the pilot? Are you starting all 3 storylines?
Yes,
Okay.
I do. And that's not an easy thing to do. But because Gertrude is the primary person who brings us in, Gertrude's our eyes and ears into this world. Then I was able to she's the main focus of her action is the main action that starts the whole show. So, but these other 2 women are critical to the storytelling. I have to introduce them, and I have to introduce where they are in their lives. So Gertrude starts, her daughters are starving, her husband is abusive, she has to figure out a solution to this problem. Then I'm with Retta. Retta's best friend has died. She has no family. Retta's upset because there's going to be no one there to be witness to her burial. Then we have Annie, brand new telephone coming into the house. This invention is going to open up their lives. They're planting tobacco instead of cotton. Edwin and she are on that front page of the Charleston Gazette because tobacco is going to be, they're the first people to bring tobacco into the region of South Carolina. You know, you have to introduce each character and where they are emotionally and where they are set against the backdrop of this bigger picture, which is the economy is decimated right now. The boll weevil has decimated the cotton crop. I never want to lose sight of the backdrop of which I'm telling these intimate stories, because that backdrop is the reason that these stories exist. And so tobacco may bring Branchville back to life, you know, and all eyes in the western part of the state are on the Coles family. If they succeed with tobacco, then there'll be tobacco for the rest of the state. And they think that will save the economy of South Carolina.
So just to wrap, it's 30, you're doing a 30-minute drama, 8 episodes for a Netflix limited series?
It's an hour.
It is. But the scripts you said were 26 minutes?
No, the scripts are 60 minutes.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah, they're each an hour.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you know what you do too is you start to discover things that you hadn't discovered in the writing. Oftentimes in an outline, you think you know what you're going to write, and it's a great blueprint for writing. But once you start writing, things start to come alive in a different way. I found that in episode 2, I really needed to understand from the macro perspective what's happening in the region with regard to tobacco versus cotton, and I put a scene in with the governor of South Carolina and Edwin and Annie talking about it at the governor's mansion. So that illustrates that Edwin is a very powerful man in the region. He and the governor are friends. Well, they're all friends. And it also helps that when I get to the end and I have the governor come back at camp at the very end, I've already put that in motion. So you want to start to put things in motion that might not be set in motion at the beginning of your book, but they need to be set in motion for a limited series or for a series.
I think we have, Marcus has has 2 questions.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Hi, Deb. This is my second time with you. I love being in talks with you because you're clearly a storyteller and you have such a beautiful way about articulating your thoughts.
Well, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so I do have 2 questions, but I think the second one is going to be a very short one. What helped you choose your episode length? Was it the network or nurture? That's my second question. And my first question was, did your pitch change at all now that you were the writer instead of the producer? Did it feel different for you walking into that Netflix room since you're used to being in the other role?
I was a nervous wreck. I'm never nervous during pitches, ever. Because I'm always helping the writer, and I've done so many of them. But when it's you and you're putting your soul out to be judged, will they buy it or not buy it? I was really anxious about it. And plus I had so much I wanted to say, probably too much. I was like, I'm going to play you the music I want, and I'm going to show you the pictures of camp. But that was daunting. With regard to length, that's a good question too, because I found myself worried about length when I was writing the outline. I was like, oh boy, I think I'm short. I think I'm short. And then several friends of mine said, Deb, take off your producer hat. You're not a producer right now. You're a writer. Stop thinking like a producer. Just write. And your first episode may be short. And it was like 43 minutes, 43 pages. And you know, what happens is when you've done all you can see to do and you get other sets of eyes, then they come back with these incredible notes. At least that's been my experience. And I was able to fill in places that I hadn't seen before. They saw things I couldn't see. And once you have that, then you know, you're able to increase the quality of the work. And I found that from them, they're saying that, you know, the first episode should be a little bit shorter because the research for Netflix shows that audiences always watch the first 2 episodes, and the first 2 episodes is what determines whether or not they're going to sit and binge on the whole thing. So the second episode is a full 60 pages. The first episode is like 46, 47 pages. So don't worry about your length when you're first starting. You might be freaked out, oh God, I don't have enough, or oh God, I have too much. It's much better to do too much. You can always pull back. It's easier to pull back than it is to push forward. But write everything you can see to write, and then go back and shape it. You know, my friends call it a vomit draft. Just write your vomit draft, write it down, just put it on paper. And then you'll start to see places where you can shape and form. It's like sculpting, right? You just throw the clay on the wheel, and the first pass looks like hell, and then the second pass starts to take shape in ways that you hadn't necessarily anticipated. Things come to life when you start to work with the words and work with the material. Does that answer your question, Marcus?
Yes, terrific answer. Thank you so much, Deb.
You're welcome.
We have Anja who has a question for you.
Hi, my name is Anya, and I'm a writing student, and I don't know much about the dramatic writing side of things. So my question was, what are the biggest differences between writing a novel versus writing for television?
Well, a novel is very interior. You can spend an entire chapter on someone's inner thoughts. You know, think about your favorite books. You know, the classics. Shakespeare, you know, you can go off on tangents and, you know, explore the whole different ways. Whereas with wish I could remember, my husband had this great saying. I can't remember who said it, but writing a screenplay is like writing a novel is like writing with a little pencil, but writing a screenplay is writing with a 200-pound pencil, because you have to consider the visual elements. You have to consider how to tell a story cinematically, and you have to consider how you use the subtext to tell the story. I don't like stories that have the subtext written out for me. Audiences are much smarter than we give them credit for. My husband's a teacher at the American Film Institute, and he has a saying that 2 + 2 = 5. And what that means is you can have different elements in telling your story, but having these certain elements together create a new equation for the audience to decipher. So subtext should not be spoken out loud, but the camera can reveal it for us. Like I said, this book was called Alligator originally, because in my mind, all the women are alligators. The alligators are the only reptile in the animal kingdom, in the reptile kingdom, to care for their young. They take care of their babies. They carry them out of their eggs and hatch them, and they keep them with them for 6 months. They teach them how to hunt. They take care of them. And then after 6 months, if they don't leave the nest, then she'll eat them. You know, she's a tough mother, but she teaches them the basics, and if they can't survive, then she'll kill them. So in my mind's eye, my women are like alligators. But that's a subtextual thing. I never should say that out loud. That should be seen or perceived in the actions of these women. And because of their circumstances, they're incredibly difficult, tough circumstances. Hopefully, you know, nobody else would know that but me, but I think about Hopefully that answers your question, Anya.
Yes, thank you.
Anya, I'm sorry I butchered your name. I called you Anja. I apologize.
It is okay.
Kelly has a question next.
Hello, so my name's Kelly and I am a dramatic writing student and I'm very early kind of in developing my process as a writer. And I was wondering if you have any advice for getting into the mindset of a character in order to kind of present the correct elements of their personality in the context of the story.
Yeah. Sit down every day at the same time. Sit down every day at whatever time you like, or frankly, even if you don't like that time, give yourself the same time every single day and write without thinking. And it may be shit, pardon my French. It may not be good, and you may judge the hell out of it. But oftentimes what happens is, if you sit down at the same time every day and you write 1 hour, just as I did, I just gave myself permission to write badly as I could. At some point, your subconscious will find the voice of that character, and it might be tiny. It might be an action she takes, or something she tastes, or something she hears. And when you're writing at that same time every day, put her in a circumstance and then show me the room that she's in or the place that she's in. What does she hear? What does she smell? What time of year is it? What are the elements like outside? Set the place and put her in that place as clearly as you can, and she will start to talk to you.
What?
I promise you.
I love that.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kimmy has 2 questions.
Hi, I'm Kimmy. I'm a film major. It's very nice to meet you, Deb. I was wondering, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in multiple facets of film, as someone who's worked as both a producer and now diving into the writing industry? How easy is it to experiment with different roles and multiple careers in the film industry?
Well, I think that's a great question. I used to be an actor. When I first started in the business, I was an actor. And it was because I didn't know that there were other jobs. I came from this tiny place in Kentucky. I knew I needed to get out of Kentucky. I knew I wanted a creative life, but I didn't know what else there was. And I was acting. I went to the Actors Theater of Louisville. I did an off-Broadway play called The Foreigner. I was working. My agents wanted me to come to California. I got to California, and I was like tired of being told I was too fat, too short, too thin, too pretty, not pretty enough. And I really needed something that I could control. And so I started producing theater. I started producing theater so I could put myself into shows and practice my craft. And in that act of doing something, creating my own destiny, if you will, I discovered something I had no idea that A, existed, and B, that I would love. I love producing because it allowed me to use my head and my heart. I didn't want to be poor all my life, so I decided I didn't want to do theater. I wanted to learn about film and television. I grew up, in dire circumstance, not dire, but we didn't have any money, and we had food stamps, and the electricity would sometimes. I didn't want that for my life. I needed something else. But I loved this producing thing. I loved and I'm an avid reader. I've always read and read and read and read. If you're going to produce, guys, you better love to read, because reading is a critical component of being able to help develop material and produce material. But my point is that once you open a creative channel, then anything's possible. An artist is an artist, right? So the river is flowing, but there are many rivulets off that river. If you're a good actor, you have a knack for dialogue. I bet you money you could write, if you know how to put things together and build community and put people together, you can produce. I think that the world is wide open for anybody who steps into creative life. You can produce, you can write, you can act, you can production design if you want. If you want to learn about cinematography, there's no reason why you can't. I'm a full-fledged believer in not limiting yourself in the scope of of your artistic endeavors, because we are capable of many things.
Thank you so much. That was really great. I have another question for you. What are some key elements you look for in a screenplay when producing? To you, what makes a story worth telling? And what advice would you give to young writers who may be second guessing themselves and or their abilities as a storyteller?
Well, first of all, I'm going to answer the second first. I've been there. I understand second guessing yourself. I understand how terrifying it is. Give yourself permission to fail. Sit down every day, sit your butt in a chair every day for just 1 hour or 30 minutes. I don't care. But make yourself sit down, and you'll start to, all those people's expectations and judgments and all that bullshit will start to fade away, because it's just irrelevant. What's relevant is what you want to put yourself in that stream, in that river. You want to be able to flow, you know, right? So you've got to give yourself permission to fail. And by doing that, you eliminate all that excess baggage of, oh God, what is somebody going to think? Oh God, what if it isn't good? Or the what ifs start to disappear if you allow yourself to do the work. Allow yourself to do the work. That was the second part of your question. I'm sorry, the first part was?
What are some of the key elements you would look for in a screenplay and producing?
Characters. I look for interesting characters. Interesting characters set in a world that I haven't necessarily seen before. I'm interested in unique worlds, but most importantly, I'm interested in fully fledged, fully developed characters, and the detailed specifics of those characters. Because if they're detailed and specific, they're universal. Everyone will be able to understand and relate to them. They don't have to be good people. They don't have to be bad people. They have to be specific, real people. And then that interests me.
Thank you so much. This was so helpful and so wonderful. It was nice talking to you.
You're welcome, Kimmy.
I see 3 more questions, so we'll try to get them all in, because I know that they're dying to ask you. Jade is next.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Jade. I am a performing arts and dramatic writing student here. And I was wondering, when you were transitioning your novel into a screenplay, were there any compromises you had to make, or any like tough decisions? And how did you go about picking the most important parts and almost like narrowing it down to what was essential?
I haven't had to make any compromises yet, but I anticipate I will if I'm allowed to shoot it, because, you know, production is a collaborative art. You only get X amount of money. You know, as I'm writing my first 2 episodes and I'm looking at the animals that are in my world, and I can hear the line producer in my head going, "We can't afford all those animals." Well, I'm not going to worry about that right now, but, you know, I have to have an alligator. That's just the way it goes. And, you know, I haven't had to make any compromises yet. I'm very lucky. And that's the beauty of creating your own work. You shouldn't even be thinking about compromises right now. When you get to production, there are going to be limitations financially. There are going to be limitations in terms of your weather. There are going to be limitations in terms of your location. It's not going to be exactly as you imagined it or seen it. But the beauty of that is that it makes you think creatively in a whole new way. And it can create opportunities where you might think that there are limitations or compromises. If you look at them like, oh, I have to solve this. So it might create it. I oftentimes find a limitation of money or a limitation of a location or weather or whatever can create an incredible opportunity that where otherwise you wouldn't have had, you wouldn't have found, you wouldn't have seen.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Caitlin, you're up.
Hi, I'm Caitlin.
Hi, Caitlin.
I'm a photo and film student at here, but I was wondering, since I am interested in producing, what did you enjoy doing more? Did you enjoy producing or writing more? And how has being either a producer and or a writer helped either your producing or your writing career?
Well, in television, the showrunners are the writers and they're the producers. So in many ways, they go hand in hand. In the past, I've only been a non-writing executive producer. I find that writers often, any creative person, if you have the right partner, it's just helpful, because producing television is it's an enormous enterprise. It's a lot of money, and you have a lot of people relying on you, and you're writing scripts, you're prepping episodes, you're shooting episodes, you're posting episodes, you're helping with marketing. You know, it's a huge job. But in television, if you're a writer, you learn how to become a producer, and the two go hand in hand, because the showrunner of any television show is the boss. They're the visionary. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Lee, we have Patrick, Johara, and Kiara, but I don't know if we have time for everyone.
I'm good if you want to keep going.
Okay, let's do those three. Great questions, everybody. Terrific questions. So yeah, let's go in the order that you just called it, Avery. I think you started with Patrick.
Patrick, yeah.
Hello, I'm Patrick. I'm a film major. I'm mostly DP. Nice to meet you. So my question is, do you have to be great at writing in order to be a producer? And what's your recommendation for someone who's not mainly writing but interested in producing? And thank you. I like to put people together, but not big in writing.
Well, you don't have to be. I mean, there are a lot of non-writing executive producers. I was one for years. But you do have to read a lot. So, and I say that because you really have to develop a vocabulary in which to help a writer, and you have to be able to articulate what it is that you think works and what it is you think doesn't work, and provide solutions for those people. So you don't have to necessarily be a writer to be a producer at all, but you do have to have a really fundamental grasp of storytelling, and the different ways in which a story can be told, structurally, character development, dialogue, you know, all of that. So, like I said, you don't have to be a writer, but you should have start to develop a very strong fundamental philosophy and understanding of story. I love story. I love storytelling. And I'm learning a lot now too, Patrick, about lenses and things like that, which that's a shortfall of me. I don't necessarily understand all of that, but I'm starting to learn, because a camera is so important in terms of revealing subtext. I love a good director who, when I'm watching, I can see the subtext. Same with production design, right? Production designers plant these beautiful little seeds of subtext in a story that just helps bring the story to life in a new way. That's a tangent, but if you feel inclined to produce and you have an understanding of story and you can build community in a place where people can come and leave their best at the table, do it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Johara, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name incorrectly.
Turn your
I always forget to unmute myself first. No, but you're saying my name correctly. I was wondering, my question was, how do you figure out how do you drive your plot or your story? Because I know you said that in the first episode, you kind of plant the seed of what happens afterwards. But like, once the story starts, how do you decide, okay, this is going to happen in order for something else to happen? Because I'm sure you have like a lot of ideas of what can start something, but how do you pick from there? And then how do you continue in a way that makes sense when you like end?
Well, I think the most important thing to ask yourself is, with regard to your characters, why here, why now? Why here, why now? And you want to put them in a dramatic place or a comedic place at the very beginning, and you set them in motion based on the why here and why now. I be careful of setting out your plot. Set your characters in motion. Your characters, the why here, why now, what is their circumstance? What is the most heightened circumstance you can put them in? And then what is the obstacle they have to face and overcome in order to progress through your story?
And that makes a lot of sense.
Good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's such a great, that's the whole thing, So Deb, what a wonderful, great way to summarize that. We have our last question, Kiara.
Our last question,
Hello.
actually coming from Kiara, who was the first person to contact me with questions. She's been very excited about this workshop.
Yeah, this has been really great. Actually, let me.
Okay, this has been really great, and I love. Sorry, I love your work. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I was very excited about your stories, the work. I write about generations of women, and your book sounds amazing, so I'm going to definitely read that. My question is, how can you tell again how you knew that it was not just stories, but it should transfer over visually to the screen or as a series?
I'm not sure I understand the question. So how did I know?
Yes. How did you know that your stories were, that they should be not just in book form in your short stories, but that they should be as a series?
I think when I wrote the story, I wrote with a cinematic thought to the story. So when I wrote it, I envisioned it. You know, I've been doing television for 30 years, so television and film. So I think probably that influenced me greatly in the telling of this story. I always thought it would be, if I had, even when I had those 5 little short stories, in my secret dream of dreams back here in the back of my head, I thought, oh, it'd be so cool if I could tell all these stories like a roots for women, like how these women from this one family gains autonomy and prosperity. How long does that take? You know, how do they rise up? How do they feed themselves? How do they get through a patriarchal society? How do they educate themselves? How do they step away from these roles that have been deemed by society, that have been put upon them? You know, I swore to myself, this is a tangent, I was never going to get married and never have kids, because I didn't see any marriages I thought were good, and I thought kids were just going to suck me dry. I just didn't want them. And I see that cute little baby behind you that's so cute.
My daughter, yeah.
But I will tell you what I discovered was that by leaning into the things I was most afraid of, my life became fuller. I became a better human being because that's just my journey. I'm not saying it's right for everybody. It's not right for everybody, but it just became better for me. Life became better. I had more people willing to support me as an individual, willing to support me as an artist, willing to support me I'm not just a mother, I'm not just a wife, I'm not just a producer, I'm a person who has thoughts and dreams and hopes, and I wanted my characters to have those things too, to be individuals. And you know, women have an awful lot put upon them societally, an awful lot of responsibility, and I wanted to examine those roles and to see how we can rise above those roles and those expectations.
Thank you. That was wonderful, and I agree with all of that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I'm so appreciative of the time, and thank you for all these incredible questions. And I wish you all the best. Sit down every day, write badly.
Thank you so much, Deb. And thank you, Avery, for doing, as always, a fantastic job as the moderator. And thanks to everybody that joined us. We are taking suggestions and recommendations for upcoming guests and guesto programming. You have my email in your registration for this event, so you can send something to me directly if you'd like to. I want to point out that Friday we have a very special event happening. It's a very special guest and guesto seminar called Pass the Mic, Conversations with Black Creatives. You can look for more information on scad.edu. If you follow scad.edu on social media, there's also information there with links to register for this event on Friday. It's the first guest and guesto seminar, and I think it's going to be really dynamic. So I hope everybody will join us. And again, thanks to Deb and to all of you. Have a good rest of your week.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Deb. Bye, everybody.
Bye.